Greetings, everyone. Welcome into another edition of the Wolverine podcast here on thewolverine.com. It is Monday, August 19th. We are, math is hard, 12 days away from the start of the 2024 football season? Michigan, Fresno State, 7:30 p.m. NBC on August 31st. And if the weather is anything like it is today, as we record here on a Monday afternoon, it is going to be a prime vibes day, as the kids would say. The vibes have a chance to be very high. So two-man booth today. Anthony Broom here with Clayton Safety. A lot to get to. We talked to a couple assistant coaches over the weekend, Steve Casula and Lamar Morgan, some things to pour over with them. We will also kind of do a rapid fire reset, so to speak, on what some of these position battles look like heading into the last week of fall camp, because when we talk next Monday, we're inside of a game week. So this is really the last week for guys to separate. We know some of these battles are going to go into the regular season, but we will do our best to update you guys on that as well. Clayton, welcome on in. Getting closer and closer. To quote Chris Ballas, we don't wish our summers away, but we're getting a little too close for comfort here. Now I'm just ready for the season to start.
Well, you can both enjoy summer and want football to come, and I'm doing both, but football's coming regardless. In early next week, 90s, 91, my app here doesn't go all the way till Saturday, but it's 80s on Wednesday, so it's going to be, I think, pretty beautiful. Hopefully, maybe I'll take 80s, but not 90. But I love those long tailgates before the first game, so I'm excited for that, and should be an exciting opener with Fresno State.
All I can ask for from a weather perspective is the Washington game weather from 2021. That day was like, when you think of the last summer tailgate or the last, getting to the first, second week of September, to me, that's like the peak of it, just from a weather perspective, from an atmosphere perspective. They're going to commemorate last year's national championship team. Jim Harbaugh will be honored with Jack and Jackie Harbaugh there. So we'll see what happens. Excited to get there. But before we get into our show today, we are brought to you first off by our friends over at Homefield and their Can't Miss Kickoff 2024 campaign. It's a month-long campaign leading up to the season, with some of the key features being the football boxes, the coaches' jackets, bomber jackets, Champions Week. There's a couple new schools that have been added to the Homefield roster, and of course a refresh of the Michigan Wolverines items in the store. They revealed some of those last week. The jackets are amazing. The football boxes have been really cool, some of the stuff that they have revealed. So the boxes have 3 never-before-seen items for your school that are not available anywhere else. They're curated so fans will have new gear to wear all season long, and it's suitable for all weather conditions. We're going to have the vibes are high first couple weeks of the year. You're probably going to have games in October and November where it rains and you're freezing your rear end off. Homefield stuff will cover all of that for you. So head on over to homefieldapparel.com. Use that promo code Wolverine for 15% off your first order. Again, I've been saying it for years at this point. I've got almost an entire drawer earmarked for just their stuff. It's incredibly comfortable, from the sweatpants, from long sleeve shirts, short sleeve shirts, hoodies. It's all great. So 15% off your first order at homefieldapparel.com using that promo code Wolverine. We are also brought to you today by ourselves.
I'm wearing my Homefield right now, by the way. It's so comfortable. National Champs gear, so it's great.
That's right.
Stuff.
If you're watching the video edition, again, gotta rep the National Champs with our friends at Homefield. I have the long sleeve T-shirt that kind of has like kind of a Houston space vibe to it, which was cool. Yep. Again, shout out to our poster Steve Q Houston on the board, who got us boots on the ground at Mission Control. We were in Houston a few months ago. So use that promo code Wolverine for 15% off your first order at homefieldapparel.com. And as I was saying before, we are also brought to you today by ourselves and the self-proclaimed best deal in America. Use that promo code UM1 for 2 months of access to the Wolverine.com for only $1. Again, a lot of stuff there, including recruiting intel. There could be at least one high-profile commit popping this week. You're going to want the inside scoop on that from EJ Holland and Zach Libby. Camp stuff from Ballas, the two of us, a couple media availabilities this week. Captains, I think, are supposed to be named later this week. So all of the intel you could possibly want and more using that promo code UM1 over at thewolverine.com. Okay, Clayton. We talked to Lamar Morgan and Steve Casula, the defensive backs coach and tight end coaches, respectively, on Sunday. And I'm not sure which one is more interesting to start with. I guess we'll start with the defensive backs. Morgan is obviously overseeing a room that is a bit overhauled, given Rod Moore's injury, given Josh Wallace's graduation. You've got new faces at safety in the transfer portal, all sorts of new pieces there on that side of the ball, especially in the secondary, but also a group that feels like it has pretty good depth now. And, he touched on a lot of things from number 2 corner, from sort of how things are breaking down in the safety room, the nickel position. I'll just kind of go bit by bit here. The first thing, not too surprising, Lamar Morgan said on Sunday that sophomore Jair Hill leads the way for the number 2 cornerback battle with transfers Amir Hall and Ricky Johnson III mixing in. Says consistently a battle. It's been a process getting the young corners and new faces up to speed, but it's pretty clear at this point. Jair Hill is in front. He's the only one of those guys battling for that number 2 corner job that's been made available to us in during fall camp availability, which that's not exactly tea leaves, but it kind of is too. It feels like far and away he's kind of been the guy since spring ball ended, and no real surprises there.
Yeah, it hasn't really changed, and I think it's also encouraging that Lamar Morgan said that, considering Jair Hill posted that TikTok last week where he was wearing a sling on his arm, that a lot of fans obviously, kind of took that and were concerned, rightfully so. But good news heading into the opener that does not appear to be serious at all. And it was kind of a theme too with Lamar Morgan, where he just kept coming back to this, basically sentiment that it's really hard to get up to speed if you're a transfer with this Michigan defense, with the way Michigan plays and practices and meets and the schedule they have and the demands of being a Michigan football player. So it's not that the 4 transfers they brought in the defensive backfield won't play a lot, but it seems like the edge in nearly every situation goes to the guys who are coming back: Jair Hill at corner, Quentin Johnson, Makari Page at safety, and the other guys will have a role. Like you said, I do feel like they have some pretty good depth here. Maybe not that total star at safety. You have a star at corner, and then potentially a star at nickel if Zeke Berry or Jaden McBurrows, becomes that. But you do have more depth than you did certainly in spring ball with what they brought in the portal. And those guys will get up to speed as the year goes on. So at least for now, it seems like the guys who are coming back have the edge, and then it'll evolve as the year goes on, I'm sure.
Yeah, and something else that Morgan sort of hit on too, and it's not, again, remember last year we talked about how in the lead up to the season, Jesse Minter said that they had, the number was 27 guys that they wanted to get reps early on in the year. Didn't quite get a number on that from Lamar Morgan, but it seems like all of these guys, including the transfers, including guys like Brandon Hillman, who may have had a bigger role if not for some of these transfers, all of these guys are constantly rotating in and getting work with the ones because they want to make sure that these guys are ready. And they do have that depth. Cody Jones and Miles Pollard sort of in that camp as well. But again, I don't know that. I think it's pretty clear. It's Jair Hill, it's Amir Hall, it's Ricky Johnson. I think those are the guys kind of ahead, behind Will Johnson for that other role. Other than that, Jaden Mangum was addressed. Kind of the most at-length comments we've gotten on him since he got to Michigan. Lamar Morgan called him a good kid who works hard, says that he's in the same group as the other DB transfers in terms of getting used to a new program and something that they want him to learn. And it's kind of a reset for him because I think, coming out of, he spent his first 2 years playing under Mel Tucker, and that wasn't a very disciplined team. Wasn't a very good defense. Goes into his junior year at Michigan State. Jonathan Smith's staff kind of teaching him to rein it in a bit. He heads into the transfer portal, winds up in Michigan, where it's just taken to a whole nother level. And Morgan said that, for a guy like him to see the field, it's going to be one of those things where a good safety realizes that the best trait they can bring to the table is that they make everyone around them better. So again, I think when you just kind of sift through what Morgan was discussing with the safeties, Makari Page, Quentin Johnson, well ahead. I think Wes Walker really pushing for some serious time there, and probably this team's third safety right now. Jaden Mangum, I don't know if I'm reading too much into it, but a little bit of work to do here, despite being a borderline, all Big Ten performer. He was an honorable mention all Big Ten performer last year, but it kind of seems like the pecking order is kind of somewhat clear there.
Yeah, so you're telling me there's a difference between playing at Michigan State and playing at Michigan, and clearly, Jaden Mangum is a good player. I mean, he had 4 interceptions last year at Michigan State. He's kind of a ball hawk. He also recovered a fumble. I think probably just from having watched him in high school and going to a camp and watching him play where he looked really good and athletic, they weren't in pads at that point. But I would imagine tackling at the level you have to play in this Michigan defense and to also play over other guys who are really good at tackling is something that he needs to adjust to. That's just, a guess on my part, but it does feel like maybe it'll be a slower build for him going into the season, but I think he can make an impact. Somebody who can, pick off 4 passes in a season at the Big Ten level. And like you said, earn honorable mention honors is somewhat significant. Michigan State had 9 players that were honorable mention all Big Ten last year. Not sure if they had any that were actually all Big Ten. So he was, one of the top players on a bad team. Now just needs to learn how to be a good player on a good team. And, I think that can definitely come in time. He's still just a junior, so plenty of time for him to make an impact at Michigan.
Yeah, and for all the feedback, like coming out of his decision to enter the transfer portal, go to Michigan. Yeah, Michigan fans that were celebrating that they took Michigan State's best defensive player. You had Michigan State fans are saying, good riddance. He's not very good. We have guys that are better. Truth is probably somewhere in the middle there. Again, I think it's probably going to be good for him. He's going to have a role. He's going to play. Michigan played 4 safeties last year. Most of the looks were 3 safeties. They have guys that rotate in. So there's a role for Jaden Mangum on this defense, especially with, he does have that playmaking ability. He really does play like he's shot out of a cannon. But yeah, there's a little bit of work to do there. Really kind of the last thing that Morgan said that will kind of also transition into what Steve Casula said as well. Michigan wants to be a positionless defense, which is not at all different than what the last few years have been. We've talked about the amoeba defense and disguising looks and having guys out there that are able to do a multitude of things. For a lot of guys, especially this being a pretty young football team, could be a challenge at first. He says the players have picked up on it. And kind of transitioning into what Steve Casula said and how it pertains to the offense. The fact that this defense is showing Michigan so many looks in practice. Steve Casula said that, that sort of experience in camp is invaluable to them because it's put the offense on alert. It's made guys had to get used to identifying a jersey number and a player as opposed to, a personnel package, and all of the offense kind of has a role in that in terms of identifying that, pointing that out. So it's a bit cliche at times when we say, oh, well, there's nowhere to go but up for this offense because they play against this defense every day. But it does seem like the guys have taken to the defensive system that is mostly what they have been running with some tweaks from Wink Martindale. And for an offense that needs to get up to speed pretty quickly, Steve Casula said it's been pretty helpful for those guys as well.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting that Lamar Morgan, and really encouraging and kind of just a cool little tidbit that he mentioned that Sherrone Moore was in his meeting room, at one point during fall camp, and they were playing a clip of film, and Sherrone Moore, said, hey, the guys in the offensive room were talking about how confusing this disguise was, so you can learn from here's what they were saying about it, right? So you can kind of learn from the offensive coach in the defensive backs room, and Sherrone Moore rotating through, what rooms he's spending time in. I would imagine he's much more on the offensive side, probably in the offensive line room more than anywhere else, but he's bouncing around a little bit, and that perspective can definitely help. And I don't think the Michigan defense is going to face an offense that runs more personnel groupings and formations and has as many motions in its arsenal than the Michigan offense it faces on a daily basis. Like, I think one of the reasons why Michigan played so slow last year was because they subbed so much, and it would be one play, they'd be in 13 personnel, and then the next play it's 11 or 12, and you're just, each and every play, each and every series, seeing something different. The motions, you have to be on high alert for that if you're a defense. Nick Saban talked about how they didn't play a team that huddled really all season long, and they were throwing things at them that they didn't expect to see. And that's pretty telling, given that Nick Saban's one of the better coaches of all time. I think some people think he is the best. So I think that's really encouraging. And then on the flip side, if you're the Michigan offense, you're not going to see a more confusing defense than the one you face in practice every day. So the iron sharpening iron, can't believe I just said iron on accident, is happening on a daily basis within this program. And I think that is a big positive for both sides of the football.
Yeah, to jump around a little bit with what Casula said about the offense. He said he would not be surprised if Colston Loveland led the team in receiving yards this year. He said, given Loveland's skill set, Kurt Campbell's background of getting tight ends involved, and the quote I like from him, he says, the ball finds talent, technique, and energy. Just staying on Colston Loveland for a second, Casula said he's playing faster. He's moving around great in fall camp, faster than he was this spring. Says he's been thoughtful about his plan of attack, and his play speed has improved. Going back to maybe offensive philosophy type things, again, Casula, this is no surprise. We know what this Michigan program is. He says they're going to play a lot of tight ends. They expect to run out plenty of looks in 11 personnel, 12 personnel, 13 personnel. Casula called the offense a, quote, living, breathing organism, and that they will do whatever it takes to win. In terms of if they're going to open it up or not, like we've heard some players say, Casula said that Michigan will run basically whatever its players can handle, which is, whatever they've picked up on will be what's in the playbook. They'll do it with a high attention to detail. And he said that it's been fun to install in the lead up to the season. So, when you look at this Michigan offense, some folks have always wondered, what are they going to be? Are they going to be run heavy? Which I still think, at the end of the day, the way that they play football, they are going to want to run the football more than they pass the ball. Oftentimes it's because they are protecting a lead at the end of the game, but it's right back to the philosophy of by any means necessary. And that doesn't look sexy on a stat sheet all the time. Nothing about, unless you look at Blake Corum's video game like touchdown numbers from last season, there's not really a whole lot that jumps off the page about what Michigan's offense was last year. But when they needed to zig, they did. When they needed to zag, they did. And, again, stats be damned. This offensive approach is pretty much going to be the same.
When we had Kurt Campbell on the show before fall camp, he said a few things that were really interesting. But one of them was that fall camp is going to at least be the start of the process of figuring out what personnel grouping is their favorite, is their, the thing that they're best at. Last year it was 12. Talked about the number I've referenced several times throughout the offseason, but 58.3% of snaps. Michigan had multiple tight ends on the field last season. Feels like it's going to trend in that direction, over the 50% mark again this year. 58.3 was really high, but when you have A.J. Barner, who went in the 4th round, and Colston Loveland, who could legitimately go in the 1st round next year, there's reason to get them on the field. So, they're figuring that out right now. I think it could take into, and of course it will, into the games to figure out exactly what they're best at. But I think certainly the tight ends are going to have a pretty big role. And one of the things Steve Casula mentioned was, as you mentioned at the top here, starting to talk about what Casula said, was Kurt Campbell's track record with tight ends. When he called the offense at Old Dominion in 2021, they had a tight end, Zach Kuntz, who was a 6'8", 255-pounder, who's currently on the New York Jets, who was incredible at the combine, 40-inch vertical, 10.8 broad jump. Those led tight ends at his combine, and then ranked second with a 4.55 40-yard dash. Kind of similar to Colston Loveland. Loveland's not that tall, but they're both great athletes, and I think Loveland's going to do great at the combine whenever he comes out. And he had over 70 catches in 2022. In 2021. He had 692 receiving yards. Now, those both ranked second on the team. He tied for first on Old Dominion with 5 receiving touchdowns. So we haven't seen Kurt Campbell call an offense except for one game against East Carolina last year at Michigan yet. But you would imagine, given that probably one of the best players on the team, definitely the best player on the offense, I would say, going into the year, is your tight end, that he is going to have a chance to lead this team in receiving. I would ask you, is it a good thing to have a tight end leading your team in receiving?
I mean, just look at the NFL level. Like if your tight end is Travis Kelce or Rob Gronkowski or modern guys like Sam Laporta, yeah, that's not a big deal, especially if you can run the football, control the line of scrimmage. Again, you look at what this team, what they have a chance from an offensive perspective to be from a bread and butter standpoint is this team could do a lot of damage over the middle of the field. I mean, with both tight ends, maybe even 3 tight ends. We'll talk about the guys that are maybe breaking out for that number 3 role here in a second. But again, yeah, I don't think that's crazy at all, especially you have a guy like Colston Loveland who could flex out and play in the slot. He might play a little boundary wide receiver this year. When you have a guy who's just a matchup nightmare, no, it's not crazy. And I think that, we'll talk about some hype, more kind of hype on the Marlon Klein front here from Casula here in a little bit. But yeah, I don't think it's crazy at all. I don't think it's a hot take. I don't think it's bad for the offense. I think it speaks to how good of a player and how much of a matchup problem Colston Loveland could be.
When do you think was the last time a Michigan tight end led the team in receiving yards or catches?
Had to be Jake Butt, right?
Nope.
Or later.
Nope, it was before Jake Butt.
Wow, that's surprising. Because remember 2017, was it 2017 where they went the entire year without a touchdown from a wide receiver?
Or they went several games. I know Grant Perry had some, but yeah, 2017 they came really close. Sean McCune was 4 yards short of leading the team in receiving yards to Grant Perry. But it has not been this century that Michigan's had a tight end lead the team in catches or receiving yards. In 1997, Tooman came really close. Jermaine Tooman came very close. He led the team in receiving yards per game, but not full receiving yards. He did miss a game. So it doesn't happen very often. And I would say, 17 was clearly when they came the closest. That was not a very good offense. Like you said, I mean, they went a long stretch there without having a wide receiver score a touchdown. I think like having a tight end leading you in receiving is an indicator that you're not all that dynamic and explosive of an offense. Now, Colston Loveland is a very unique tight end. Maybe, as Jake Butt has said, he could be the best ever at Michigan. So I think that you have to throw that caveat in there. So it's interesting to me. I would much rather have a receiver do it or a wide receiver do it. And actually in 97, the guy who led the team in catches was Chris Howard from the running back position, which is just kind of interesting little rabbit hole I was going down there. So I actually didn't, it takes forever. Like I didn't get to the year where a tight end last led Michigan in receiving yards or catches. So it would be very, very not unprecedented, but very rare if that happened. I would tend to, I like a wide receiver doing it, but again, Loveland's a different type of beast.
Yeah. And I think too, when you're more sort of a hybrid offensive weapon, we're starting to get to a point where, defenses are going positionless, offenses to a lesser extent, but these tight ends are basically jumbo slot receivers now. And I think the closest thing Michigan's had to that is probably what Jake Butt was. But, this guy, even at his best, Jake Butt wasn't getting, and I could be wrong here. And no, Jake Butt's a friend of the show, obviously, but I don't know that he was ever getting first round pick type of hype as a prospect. And I think when you get that at the tight end position, it's because these NFL teams see that you're kind of a unicorn. And so again, I think that ideally you have one of these wide receivers step up. I think that the attention, that's the thing too, is that like the attention that he's going to get is going to open things up for Marlon Klein. It's going to open things up for some of these other wide receivers, but I think that the sky's the limit for him. And I don't think we've seen his best football yet. So I don't really know what that looks like. It's a little bit of projection there when we have that type of conversation on him, but clearly, I mean, I think Michigan is comfortable throwing whatever it needs to at him, and they're going to get what they want out of him. Casula also says, most of the hype is, we'll start with Marlon Klein for a second. Steve Casula is on the staff when Marlon Klein committed to Michigan and said he was taken aback by his size and speed. headlined by a play on film where he ran down a ball carrier after an interception. Casula praised his high-end physical traits. Again, not only is he pretty locked in as the number 2, it might be a situation where, similar to the running backs, it might be more of a 1A, 1B type of thing, which is a dynamic that we've certainly seen Michigan operate before at the tight end position. I asked Casula about some of those other guys emerging in that next man up sort of role. Zach Marshall, the sophomore, got a lot of love. And Jalen Hoffman, who we've heard as kind of Max Bredesen's understudy, getting a call out. And those were the two guys specifically that got a call out from a name, like from a, this is the guy. I mean, we've heard good things about Prieskorn behind the scenes. We've heard good things about your guy, Deacon Tony Ellie. But when asked about it yesterday, those were the two names that he brought up, was Zach Marshall and Jalen Hoffman. So thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's up to Colston Loveland. By the way, this year to lead the tight end room in snaps. That was A.J. Barnard last year. So I think that leads me to believe that Marlon Klein emerging into that role, which he kind of did and rose to that level in the spring, is means he's going to have a huge role. Again, we'll see how many multiple tight end sets they run this year. But Marlon Klein, somebody that is going to have a lot on his plate this year. I think he's got to be able to block. That's what kept A.J. Barnard on the field, and then of course make the most of his opportunities when the ball comes his way. Max Bredesen will be a huge piece of this offense as well. I think he's going to get more snaps. And, so Michigan's at the point where they have so much talent, right, where just because a player is good doesn't mean they're going to play a lot. Like, I wouldn't imagine, barring injury, Zach Marshall or Jalen Hoffman play much, but it's really good to hear that they have kind of stepped up here. And that if somebody did go down, right, you could trust a Zach Marshall, a guy who, by all accounts, has developed really quickly after being a 3-star recruit in high school, and is just, I mean, look at the photo of him there if you're watching on YouTube, just gung-ho about the program, gung-ho about football. I know, Anthony, you've had some great interviews with him where he's talking about, Chris Jenkins taking him under his wing and that sort of thing. So I love, just hearing about Zach Marshall. But the fourth, the tight end who was fourth in offensive snaps on Michigan's team last year was Josh Beetham, who's no longer with the team, a former walk-on, was 61, only played in 9 games. So barring injury, I don't think we're going to see a whole bunch of those guys. But I do think Michigan is stronger now at tight end, where Josh Beetham or, I guess Jalen Hoffman is a walk-on, but that's kind of a specific role at fullback, where a guy like that would have to play. I think you have Zach Marshall, Tony Ellie, Jalen Hoffman if you're going with the fullback role. So the depth there is really strong. And then we haven't even mentioned Brady Prieskorn, who I think could break out, or Hogan Hansen, who was also here in the spring as freshman. So they got a lot there in that room.
Yeah, and it just goes to show, again, we're not projecting that all of these guys are future stars, but I just think that when you start running through the names and the depth, you feel a little better. Like, you see what the staff sees in terms of feeling good, not just about what they have this year, but the next few years, and maybe life without Colston Loveland a year down the road or so. So really good stuff there.
They got guys. They got
guys.
There's Shane Gillis. We got guys.
I'm trying to think. Any other thoughts on Casula? No, that's pretty much it that stands out from a pod perspective. Anything else stand out from, I think, was Sunday the only availability we had since last we spoke here? I think it was.
We had some players on Thursday night. I was so impressed by Wesley Walker, some of the comments he made, Michigan's 6-year senior safety who's played a bunch of college football. And I asked him, how Sherrone Moore compares to the 3 other head coaches he's had in college football. He played at Georgia Tech. He played at Tennessee for a couple of years, and then spent the spring with Jeff Brom, who's been a head coach for a while now. And he said Sherrone runs the smoothest practice that he's seen. He said it's all football here, that it's not this rah-rah stuff. And I imagine, sometimes you see these teams like gathered up at the end for 20 minutes. It's at Michigan, it's football. Like, it's good on good, as Wesley Walker said, more than he's ever seen. And again, he's seen a lot of it at in the college football level. So I know we talked about him with the DBs earlier, but to hear that perspective about how Sherrone Moore is running things is really impressive. And then the story too that Lamar Morgan told about how involved Sherrone is, and the tidbit about him coming into the DB room and kind of sharing the offensive perspective. I just really like what I'm hearing about the way Sherrone Moore is operating things heading into year one. And of course, he's going to have to do it in, show in games that they can win these big ones here this season. But so far, so good.
Yeah, I was impressed with Walker too. I mean, he is a guy that, again, there's a lot of respect for, the Makari Pages, the Quentin Johnsons of the world, but Wesley Walker's a 6-year guy, and he's played a lot of football too, and he wants to get his ass on the field, and he's going to keep fighting like hell for a job, and I think he probably is that third safety right now. I did even mention this, like when we talked to Lamar Morgan, when he was talking about, the transfer defensive backs, like Amir Hall, Ricky Johnson, Jaden Mangum, Wes Walker, as talented as all those guys are, and as for, they brought those guys in because they fit Michigan, but there's a different, the practices are different. The intensity is different. I think you just talked about it with Wes Walker and, having more good on good during practice than any other place he's ever been. So,
and playing when your body's not feeling well too, like Lamar Morgan said, when that's an adjustment at Michigan that you got to play through that stuff.
I mean, that's a core value at Michigan. I mean, think of all the stuff that Ben Herbert did and that Justin Tress is doing now. It was borderline like military training in terms of some of the things they were asked to do. So again, does anything that's being said project success in the future? We don't know yet. They're going to play a football game in 12 days, and they'll play the biggest football game they've played since, 8 or 9 months ago, 7 days after that. But they're saying all the right things, and you get like there is an edge to this team. It doesn't feel like just lip surface that, they have to go back and chase it again. It doesn't feel like they're fat and happy, I guess is the best way to put it. So we'll see what happens. We'll see who those guys are later this week that sort of set that mentality, that embody that mentality. When Michigan announces who its captains are, the players will vote on that later this week, and they'll be made available to the media, I believe, on Thursday. So we'll have an update on that when it comes. Really quick before we get into questions, I kind of wanted to, since this is the last week of fall camp, I kind of wanted to just go rapid fire with some of the things we've heard about each of these position battles. Don't have to spend too much time on each one, but we'll start with the big one at quarterback. I mean, right now, I think it's tough to say who the favorite is. I think from, if you're just asking my gut feel on it, it does feel like Alex Orji has kind of been maybe the most well-rounded of the candidates. We've heard a lot of good things about the camp that Davis Warren has had as a pure passer, and Jack Tuttle has worked in there as well, despite being a little banged up. But right now, to me, it feels like Orji. Do you have any dissenting or, affirming thoughts on that?
I think when we talk about position battles, a lot of times the implication, not from us, but just like the word battle, right, is like there's a winner and a loser. But I think in a lot of cases, there's a winner and it's somebody else who's contributing as well. And I think that could be the case even at quarterback. Usually it's more, whether it's on the D line or, at corner, you rotate guys in a little bit more. But at quarterback, all options are open. Like, I think we're going to see multiple quarterbacks in significant, portions of the game, like when the game's on the line in the opener against Fresno State. And we'll see what they do the next week against Texas. But yeah, I think probably Alex Orji, Davis Warren at the top right now. And it'll be really interesting to just follow. And like, will they name a guy on Monday next week when Sherrone Moore talks? Will they name somebody the morning of the game? Will they name someone at some point midweek? We have no clue. I feel like it's just so wide open.
I feel like they're going to do the Harbaugh thing and not name a starter, and we'll just find out who it is when they take that first snap. And it might not even matter. It could be Alex Orji that takes the first snap against Fresno State, and then Davis Warren gets the next series or two or something like that. So might be, it's tough to say. I think at this point they'll just ride it out. I don't think next week we're getting a rubber stamped, this is our guy. I think that they will kind of keep that close to the vest. Number 3 running back. Seems like Jordan Marshall, Ben Hall, probably the two guys most in the mix for that. I think to start the season, I'd probably give the nod to Ben Hall, but it sounds like they could both kind of combine for that.
Yeah, and as I've kind of said all offseason, I feel like the in-game, reps that they're going to get, again, hopefully, right, they're up big enough against Fresno State, and you can take out Donovan Edwards and Kalel Mullings, and we get to see Jordan Marshall and Benjamin Hall. I think those are going to help determine what this is. But I do feel like Ben Hall right now with the edge. And as Sherrone Moore said, right, like he was talking about freshmen, and he said that Jordan Marshall's been really good. He's dynamic, has a chance to be special. And somebody said, okay, is he kind of your third running back right now? He said, well, Ben Hall's playing well too. And when Jordan Marshall's pushing you, like Ben Hall is raising his game right now. So it seems like very healthy competition there.
It'd be exciting to watch, and maybe it's different week to week. It's going to be maybe a hot hand who had the best week of practice, matchup dependent. I mean, if let's just say you're playing USC and you're just going to pound them into dust, maybe you want the power rusher in Ben Hall getting a little more of those reps. But if you're looking maybe for a more dynamic guy against a Texas or against a Washington, maybe Jordan Hall is. And that's not to say that
Jordan Hall is, that's both of them. So
we'll just call it. Yeah, there we go. I made a mistake. We'll call them Jordan Hall. We'll just Frankenstein them into one thing. But exactly. I think there are certainly much worse options there. And again, I think the fact that we did speak to Ben Hall during fall camp, I think is probably a good sign that he'll have a role on this team as well. Because they don't give us depth charts, but they tend to not make guys available who aren't going to be contributors to a certain extent. So moving on from there, it seems the next most critical battle on the offensive side of things is at center. Greg Crippen, Raheem Anderson, been in the mix there. Again, I still think just based on everything that's been said this offseason and assuming good health, I think that's going to be Crippen when they open the season. But, if let's just say he's been a little inconsistent or if he's been banged up, Raheem Anderson may be more serious as a contender for that role, but I think it'll wind up being Crippen.
Yeah, I would say so too. I feel like it's nice you have two guys you can trust there. And as long as the health is 100%, I would imagine it would be Greg Crippen. It's kind of funny. Last year, they kind of played up this center battle between Drake Nugent and Greg Crippen, and Jim Harbaugh was talking about, maybe we'll do one game, one guy starts, and then the next game, the next guy starts. That's partly my Jim Harbaugh impression. And then we talked to Greg Crippen the week of the first game, and I asked him if he expects to start a game early in the year. He said, I don't know. And then, Drake Nugent just started every game and played basically every important snap all year except for the Iowa game. And shout out to Greg Crippen for stepping up, when he was called upon. So I would imagine that they're playing it up just a little bit, but that's partly because Raheem Anderson's earned the opportunity to battle for a spot. And again, it's not a bad thing, right? You can contribute in another way. Let's say a guard goes down. I think Raheem Anderson would be the next guy up at, anywhere on the interior. So it doesn't mean you're not going to contribute just because you're not the first guy right away.
Yeah. And again, the center position is so, when you talk about, really the only guy who touches the ball on offense as much as the quarterback does. And you're making calls and you're calling out protections and you're doing things like that. That's not, I don't know. That's something that you just do the quote unquote Michigan method with. I don't think that they are going to. It's nice to know that, whoever wins this job or whoever takes the field, it's two guys who have been with the program for 4 years. So should have a lot of license, a lot of ability to get the job done there. But I do think it'll be Crippen. Moving over on the offensive line, right tackle has been the other battle, and Andrew Gentry, Jeff Percy, the guys in the mix for that. And there's been some good Jeff Percy buzz over the last week or so, but I wonder where that battle's at. He's obviously got a little bit of starting experience. Andrew Gentry, we've talked about him all summer as a guy who's sort of Andrew Stuber-esque in terms of his ability to kick inside. He played both guard and tackle last year.
He's massive.
I think size stands out. I think the best version of this Michigan offensive line has Andrew Gentry in its top 5. I think that, if that light's able to come on for him and he takes a hold of that job, I think that's probably the best case scenario for them. But it does seem like that is a true battle.
Yeah, this is the one I really don't know. I feel like all we've been told is just they're battling there. Though, those are the guys in the mix, and Giovanni El-Hadi mentioned Evan Link also battling there. So who knows? And I also wonder too, if Miles Hinton were to go down, who moves over to the left side as well? Jeff Percy started a game there in the past, but who's repping there? So that's kind of something interesting too, is the backup left tackle job. And then I don't think it was by accident that last week Sherrone Moore said that and pointed out that Miles Hinton started the year last year as a starter, and then they still were trying to figure out what their best five was. Like the offensive line, you can kind of tinker a little bit. You want to get it right and get it consistent with the guys you're going to play throughout the year just to get that chemistry down, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. Even in 2022, right? I mean, Trente Jones started the year as a starter, goes out with a high ankle sprain. Carson Barnhart came in, never gave the job back. So there could be some tinkering there and some rotation there. I think that right tackle is probably the most likely spot for that to occur on the O-line.
Are there any on defense that stand out to you? We pretty much, we talked about the defensive back ones earlier on in the show. Yep. Don't really see a ton of, your starting linebackers are Jay Shumbarm, Ernest Hausman. There's not a lot of controversy there. Maybe some guys in the mix for two deep jobs. Still hearing good things about Cole Sullivan, but we'll see what that looks like. Defensive line, I think we kind of know who the top 3 to 4 guys are at each position. So is there anything we haven't addressed that sort of sticks out to you?
Yeah, just the defense is mostly like, right, who's the 4th D tackle, who's the 4th edge, who's the 3rd, 4th, or 5th linebacker. So it seems like nickel and with Zeke Berry and Jair Hill at the other corner spot are kind of settled, but it's rotation because that defense is going to rotate a lot, and I think it's deeper than maybe I thought coming into the offseason, which is really encouraging.
Okay, let's get into the questions portion of the show. Clayton, I typically tend to let you take the first question because you have the thread much more updated than I do. So why don't you read off that first one and I'll sift through here.
This goes along with some of the things we talked about, but Sasquatch616, who asks a question just about every week, which we appreciate, says, overall, have you become more or less optimistic about Team 145 as you've gotten reports of how players are performing in fall camp?
There's a couple different ways you could take this. I think I've gotten more optimistic about this team having a pretty high floor. I think this team has a floor of winning 8 to 9 games. I feel pretty safe about that, honestly, even with the schedule that they have. The ceiling, I'm not sure yet. I think that I've been encouraged to hear them speak as highly as they have about the skill players they have on offense, on the offensive line. It's just that it's that one lingering question mark where we just haven't got that same amount of feedback, and that's the quarterback position. So I feel better about this team being a borderline playoff team. I don't know if they are a playoff team yet. I picked them to win 10 games in our football preview. I'm sure we'll revisit that here in the next week or so. But and it's mostly coming from rival fans, but anyone that thinks they're going 7-5 or worse, I just think that you're out of your mind, because I think there are still pros all over this team on both sides of the ball.
It's hard to lose too many games when you have that much talent. I agree. I'd say I'm more encouraged, but is there ever really a fall camp other than if like you have a major injury that you suffer, right? Like Notre Dame lost their left tackle and Texas lost 2 running backs. Like I would say maybe the fans of their teams are slightly less optimistic than they were coming into fall camp, and maybe there were other developments that have actually led them to be, even more optimistic despite some of those injuries. But is there ever a time in fall camp when the players are coming out or the coaches are coming out and saying, yeah, we don't look as good as we should, and we're not progressing as fast as we should, and I don't know if we're going to be ready for the opener, and and then the college football season starts and crazy shit happens, right? So I think that certainly anything's possible in that regard. And an example of this is last year heading into the opener, we had heard that a high-ranking source on the defense said that the offensive line was better than it was the year before. Like this O-line is they're throwing people around and that sort of thing. And then it kind of took a while for them to click, and they didn't find their starting 5 for 4 or 5 weeks. So that's just one example of camp is one thing, but once the game starts, you kind of know more what you have. But to answer the question, I am slightly more encouraged, and I do think part of that is the depth. Like the guys who have broken out, from the sounds of it, it has helped the depth of this team, which makes me feel a little better.
Yeah, it's the old MLB spring training theory. You start seeing the videos from behind the chain link fence, and so showed up to camp in the best shape of their lives. He's really trimmed down and it's the best offseason we've ever had. And there's always a bit of that. This is probably now between 7:30 next Saturday when this game kicks off to start the year is the most optimistic any Michigan fan is going to be about this team all season long, because they're going to talk themselves. They've been reading the preseason magazines. They've been reading our football preview, which is outstanding and still available at the WolverineOnDemand.com, by the way. And you've talked yourself into, you know what? If they get good enough quarterback play, this team could run it back again and this. And, everyone's feeling good about themselves right now. And it seems like, again, knock on wood, if you're at home, it's been a pretty healthy camp so far. Maybe some bumps and bruises here and there, but you just, at this point, you're taking a deep breath that there are no plot twists ahead of next weekend's game. But I think more optimistic, to sum it all up, more optimistic from a baseline expectation. Jury's still out on what they can ultimately be this year.
Do you mind if we do a new segment called Call Out a Coworker?
Not at all.
Okay.
Unless it's me, then you can shove it.
That's fair. Jesse Simonton from On3, who does a great job, by the way, and I say call out as I'm half joking, but he tweeted today, his top 25 players in college football. And the tweet read, "The reigning champs may be down, but Michigan goes 1-2 in my top 25 impact players for 2024. Will Johnson's 1, Mason Graham is 2. I just thought the first part of that initial sentence was like, it's representative of how everyone is kind of feeling about Michigan from the outside. It's just like that they're down, like they haven't played yet. We don't know what Michigan's going to be. We don't know what Alabama's going to be under Kalen DeBoer. We don't know what Georgia's going to be. By the way, there's a 12-team college football playoff this year, so it could be a little more wide open than in the past. So it's not Jesse in particular. Again, I'm joking about that, but it's representative when people talk about the AP poll. You listen to a podcast, they hardly mention Michigan sitting there at 9. Doesn't matter. Again, it's one of those things that you chalk up in the irrelevant category, but I just feel like there's a sentiment out there, and perhaps it's one that's motivating Michigan, but there's something out there where people are just kind of glossing over this team that has some of the best players in the country on it, with a great culture, a potentially great young budding head coach and coaching staff. And it's not something to sleep on. I'll just say that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to call it a coworker because I have more class than that.
Well, this is a segment though. You're involved in this segment. It's happening.
I'll say this. I mean, I've been workshopping this in my brain for a little bit too, but I think I'm kind of like, I'm going back to in our next magazine that comes out. Speaking of the Wolverine on Demand, the WolverineOnDemand.com. Should get the URL right before I start going off on a rant. I am doing a piece on how the first time head coach or the first year head coaches since Bo Schembechler have performed, and it's hard. I don't know what the future holds for Sherrone Moore and for Michigan, but
no man knows the future.
No man knows the future, but there are unknowns similar to Brady Hoke's first year. There are unknowns similar to Jim Harbaugh's first year, where I think nationally, the narrative is that this might take a little while and they have some good players, but I could see them taking the nation by surprise, quote unquote, only because I think there's a lot. The last time I looked at the Vegas lines over the weekend, the win total's down to 8.5, which a lot of money's coming in on the under, which was at 9.5, then it went down to 9. It's at 8.5 where we sit here today. I just feel like from a national perspective, all of the storylines are about no Jim Harbaugh, no brand new defensive coaching staff, no JJ McCarthy, only one starter back on offense, but the cupboard is not bare at all. And I think this is going to be a pretty good football team. And maybe that's just, again, this is from the Wolverine.com podcast lens. Maybe it's just because we're too close to it. We hear guys talk how highly about this football team inside the building every single day, but it's hard to take people by surprise when you're the University of Michigan. But this team has a chance to do that, and I think the national champs being quote unquote down is probably overstating it a little bit. But again, I can understand why that would be the wide angle lens on this program, given that, there's still the scandal stuff out there. The perception is that Jim Harbaugh got out of town before the shit hit the fan, so to speak. So I get it, but like I said, it kind of goes hand in hand with the question we took in that I just feel good about the baseline of where this program is and what they can be moving forward.
And I picked them to go 9-3. So I'm just saying that it ain't over yet. It actually hasn't even started yet. So it's going to be fun to watch. And of course, the schedule plays into partly, how people are viewing Michigan. But I want to obviously go quicker on some of these.
Sure.
I got us off on a tangent there, but
no, this is great. And again, shout out to Jesse and On3 National. They do a lot of great work on the .com side of things. So be sure to check that out. A lot of interesting insights there. This one's from Trogdor, who says, what is one offensive wrinkle you expect to see this season? Not just a one-time thing. I mean, something new we see early on that keeps Michigan building on. And I've talked about this a little bit. I think that the way, so much of Michigan's offense last season was just coming straight at you, right? Like they were what they were. They were meat and potatoes. They did a lot of interesting things pre-snap, but I look back at the Rose Bowl in particular and how they used their athletes to create mismatches and create confusion for an Alabama defense that last time I checked was coached by one of the best coaches at any level of any sport ever in Nick Saban. I think that how they played in the Rose Bowl with the athletes they have at wide receiver, with some of the dynamic guys they have at running back and tight end, to me, I think that's going to be a little more the norm for them as opposed to some of the Harbaugh-ish stuff, if you want to call it that.
It's fair, especially since Barner's gone, right? And Colson Loveland can do some different things. I'm going to say my wrinkle is something we saw late in the year as well, which was Kalel Mullings as a blocker playing with Donovan Edwards. I really like that package when they went with two running backs, and those two in particular. And Donovan's a little bit better when you get him in space, and I think when he can just kind of follow a guy, right, like big number 20. So I think Kalel Mullings is a fantastic blocker. He's going to get his fair share of carries too, but I think that could be a wrinkle we see.
Let's go to this one from Go Blue Guy, who you quoted it and said that you loved it. So I'm going to take it here. And it's a little bit of a long one, but I'll read it all.
Worth a read. Yeah.
Go Blue Guy says, there's a lot of national buzz that Michigan 2024 is overrated because of lack of a clear number one QB and the argument that so many players and coaches have departed the program, mostly by graduating or going pro and not through the portal. It also feels like national people are doubling down on their views that Michigan shouldn't have been as dominant last year as the record reflected. So the changes all lead to them saying clearly results won't be as good this year. Joel Klatt has sort of gone a little contrary to this by saying everything has changed, but it feels the same. And he sort of expects the same results. And he's backed it up with player statements from Edwards and others saying it's just another year in the program. So who is right? What should fan expectations be for the year? How is the team and the coaching staff dealing with and addressing these issues? Is it more of the Michigan against everybody theme, or is there some sort of additional adjustment to that theme with this team and leadership group? I know this is the big story this year, and you have likely covered it already. Just wondering if anything new is being heard or said as we approach game number 1. And that's a lot to absorb. So I'm going to let you give your answer on that. I'm going to reread that, and I'll come back with what I feel about it.
Yeah, so we kind of actually just touched on it. Maybe it got me in the frame of mind for it going into the show because I kind of forgot this question was out there. But, I think that it's very clear. Like there were a couple of questions last week when Sherrone Moore was asked about, all that you lost from last season and what are the expectations and does the 12-team playoff, the fact that you can lose a couple games, like does that play into maybe how you approach the year with knowing that you can, again, drop a game or two and still compete for the national championship? And he, especially on the question about all that they lost from last season, 13 NFL draft picks, few others that were key contributors that ended up being undrafted free agents. He kind of snapped right back and was like, yeah, we got a lot of talent here though still. And, it seems like the whole team, when they're met with that sentiment, has had a similar response. So I think it's motivating them. And like we said, the national perception of them is kind of odd for a defending national champion. I don't know a defending champion that has, not had a lot of draft picks. You don't always have the coaching staff leaving.
Yeah.
That's a key factor.
This is also an unprecedented amount of change for a defending national champion.
And they were an unprecedented champion too. I guess we have to acknowledge with, when you look at the blue chip ratio and things like that, they were on the lower end compared to a lot of the other champions in the last 2 decades. So it all plays into it, but it does feel like this team is motivated by that type of stuff. And, they've been motivated by that type of stuff in the past, last year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, how they have been under the radar, so to speak. And then they've been able to rise above it and win 40 of their last 43 games.
Yeah, I do think it's a motivator. I think that it has created a chip on their shoulder because Sherrone Moore is hearing about Michigan's going to fall off because Jim Harbaugh's not there. Donovan Edwards is hearing about how it's going to be impossible for Michigan to replace Blake Corum. The wide receivers are hearing how it's going to be impossible to replace Roman Wilson and Cornelius Johnson. And you can go up and down the roster with all that. So I think that these guys have taken that on as a bit of a slight. Like, a lot of them can call themselves national champions, but to be fair, to call it what it is, there's a lot of guys who just didn't have a huge hand in that on Saturdays. And I think that is a motivating factor. And that's no disrespect to them because there's a lot of work that gets put in Monday through Friday before you even get to the game. So I'm not diminishing any of those accomplishments at all. But I think for a lot of these guys that they have kind of taken it to heart that people are questioning if they can still be good. There are guys like Giovanni El Hadi who could have started last year, 2 years ago. There are guys like that all over this roster that are kind of, quite frankly, as much as they respect their former peers, I think a guy like Gio El Hadi is probably sick of hearing how good Zach Zinter was and how impossible that is to replace. So to me, I think that's good. I don't think that you have that sort of mentality mixed with knowing what success looks like, having been with this program the last few years. So, again, I think that I expect it, to kind of sum it up, I expect it to be closer to more of the same. Now, is more of the same, were the last 3 years an outlier? I don't know. But more of the same is that at its core, there's no reason a program like Michigan can't win 9 games, 10 games every single year and be in the conversation. And I think they'll continue to be in the conversation. So that's how I feel about that.
Hopefully they're Penn State at the least, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, at the least, if that's
in a
the
given
worst
year. Yeah.
Well, they were Penn State before Penn State was what they were. I mean, lest we forget the first 6 years of the Jim Harbaugh era, very good. I don't think there's a lot of people that would trade those years in for anything, especially when you think of if you lived through Rich Rod and Brady Hoke, those years felt like they'd never come just in being in that conversation, let alone what the last 3 years were. But
you're right.
I think the baseline expectation is, just kind of goes to what the program expectation at large should be at this point, in that Michigan should win 9 or 10 games at least every single year and be in this 12-team playoff. To me, that's a new expectation. Big Ten title be damned, rivalry wins be damned. That is, to me, what will, if you're just grading a season on a pass-fail, to me, I think that's what Michigan needs to be moving forward. I think we'll end with this one, a little lighter, a little shorter. This one's from Bloomer, who says, what's the most ridiculous thing you've seen happen in college football 25?
Well, I was playing the other day. We had a potential game scoring touchdown. Alex Orji's rolling out. Colston Loveland just drops the ball. I don't know that I've ever seen him drop a pass in that game. So I'll go with that. Ended up losing the game. Very upset. Had to keep playing until very late at night. So
you have to, for every loss you have to rip off like at least 5 or 6 wins to make it feel good.
Oh yeah, it's so hard.
So I was playing Dynasty mode the other day. Now I finally got the chance to sit down, play it as intended. I started Dynasty mode as Michigan's offensive coordinator, and you can still control everything. But then when I get bored, ready for a new challenge, I'll take on a new job elsewhere. But I was in, I think, year 2 of a Dynasty playing Washington at home. And I forget again, and no one cares about this. It's the same as talking about your fantasy team, but because we're answering the question, I was down like 24-7 in the fourth quarter, come all the way back, take a 25-24 lead with like 38 seconds to go. Washington comes back, drive all the way down the field and get to like the 3-yard line with like 3 seconds left, and they take a timeout. They line up for a field goal, miss it far right. I win the game. That's how I win the game. A walk-off missed field goal. That to this point is probably the craziest thing I've seen. I don't know about you, but they just released a giant update that patched a lot of things. I never really had any of the big issues that people were complaining about, which again, thank God, but still having a lot of fun with it. Normally by this time I will have bought Madden already. I don't even think I'm touching Madden this year when I have time, which time has been fleeting with fall camp, magazine, all these other things going on, but having a fun time with it. But that's definitely the craziest thing I've seen to this point. So
great dub.
All right. Great dub. And the show rolls on. The march to the college football playoff continues. That's going to do it for us today. Good show, Clayton. This is our last. Oh my God, I can't even believe I'm saying this. It's our last show on Monday nights during the off season. Next week, we are in it. It's game week. It's go time. We'll have a Monday press conference with Sherrone Moore. We'll have talked to players. Probably wrap up some of our preseason predictions. I want to do some superlatives next week in our last show before the regular season starts. So for Clayton Safey, for our producer Megan behind the scenes, I'm Anthony Broom. Be sure to use that promo code UM1. That gets you 2 months of access to the Wolverine.com for only $1. Shout out to our sponsor over at Homefield. There's directions on them in the description below. Use that promo code Wolverine for 15% off your first order. We will talk to you guys again next time.